We all know how very important standards are to the education process. They guide both our instruction and our assessment of student learning. But too often they can be written in very student-unfriendly language, with terms that the student is entirely unfamiliar with before they have had any instruction in the area. And while that condenses the standards, it can be very intimidating for the students who look at these standards before the unit begins, and before any instruction they feel that they can't possibly master these very difficult to comprehend standards. So the method of assessment and instructional planning that I intend to use, first of all, is based off of Matt Brenner's method, and it takes those standards and first breaks them down into more student-friendly language. In doing that, it also begins each refined standard or classroom standard with the statement "I can," and that just reinforces in the student's mind that this is an achievable goal. So here we have the "I can" goals for meiosis, and our first Indiana State Standard reads, "Describe the process of meiosis and explain this process, that this process ordinarily results in daughter cells with genetic makeup identical to the parent cells." Now, a biologist knows exactly what all of that means, but again, it can be very intimidating to the students. So I have taken that standard and kept the same ideas but broken it down into two classroom standards. First, I can describe the differences between the purpose of mitosis and meiosis. Second, I can identify differences in the process of mitosis, which is a review, and meiosis. Those are much more approachable from the student's point of view. I'm sorry, I read meiosis earlier, it is mitosis. I then take those classroom standards and break them down into observable tasks that again begin with the statement "I can." So under "I can describe the differences between the purpose of mitosis and meiosis," I've broken it down into "I can identify the purpose of mitosis as growth and repair," and "I can identify the purpose of meiosis as producing haploid daughter cells or gametes and causing genetic variation or differences." So that's telling the student exactly what I'm going to be looking for anytime that I assess their ability to meet that standard. It also begins to provide them with a study guide, because this entire sheet that lays out "I can" goals, that's not just for my use. Each student in the classroom will get a copy of this paper at the beginning of the unit that it applies to. So they will be able to use this paper throughout their time working on this subject as a study guide or as an anticipatory material for upcoming pieces of upcoming lesson bits. So that's just a sampling from the first standard. Then there's a second one, describe and model the process of meiosis and explain the relationship between genetic makeup of the parent cell and the daughter cell, gametes. Those I've broken down into three class standards and then broken further into observable tasks. And then finally, explain how in sexual reproduction, crossing over, independent assortment, and random fertilization result in offspring that are genetically different from the parents. And that I only broke into one, but it's broken then into many observable tasks because there are so many independent parts in that single standard. So again, this single-page sheet serves as an outline both for me in my instruction, and it helps the students see where we're going, and it helps them review where we have been. Then off to the side of the observable tasks, you'll notice that there is a very small phrase next to a bracket that encompasses varying numbers of those observable tasks. Those words are the names of the assessments that I intend to use to measure those observable tasks. And those names match or very closely match some of the documents back on the website page. Then on the back of the same paper, and again the students would get this back as well as the front, there are two places where student progress is being assessed. They are identical tables except for the headers. The first one is the student's perception of their own growth as measured by the dates that they feel that growth has happened, and I will explain that more in a moment. And the bottom one has my perception, or the teacher's perception, based on the formal summative assessments, or formative assessments, as the case may be. Now, in each of these tables, as I said, most of the parts of the tables are exactly identical. Off to the side, in the first column, are listed the Indiana State Standards, and then the letter after it indicates which of the classroom standards that it's specifically looking at. So if I broke the state standard down into 2 classroom standards, it would have A and B. If I broke it into 3, it would have A, B, C. Then those are restated just for clarity in the second column. And then in the rest of the columns, there are rubric numbers, and the rubric key is up at the top, and it just runs from 0 to 4, 0 being essentially that the student knows nothing about the topic, and 4 being that the student knows everything that they're required to know about the topic, and then they can apply it in multiple areas and in multiple ways. They will use those numbers, in this first one, the student will use those numbers to rate their own perception of their ability. And when they do rate it, they will indicate that by putting a date in the appropriate box. So, on the first day when we talk about describing the difference between the purpose of mitosis and meiosis, before we've talked about meiosis, they can't possibly describe the difference. So on that first day, they're going to put that date under 0, just to show that that's when they're beginning to learn about this standard. As they then progress through the week, they will put the date when they feel they've reached a new level. Now they can make a very large jump or just small jumps at a time, whatever is true for them. That's what they need to record. So if the next day they feel like they're familiar with the terms, but they can't really put that knowledge together on their own, they would put that date for the next day under 1. And the goal, of course, is for them to reach complete mastery of each standard, but the dates just help them see how they are progressing, and both the students and I will be looking at these papers, and so that I know where the student feels that they are in this process. At the same time, I will be using an identical table, using the same rubric, but instead of writing the dates, I will put the name of the assessment used to measure their knowledge of the given standard, and I'll put which version it was. So if we have a pre-assessment, that pre-assessment will, the name of that pre-assessment will get placed in whatever box it most applies to, and then later when we do a summative assessment, that grade will go in whatever box it fits. The name will go in that box, and whatever grade that summative assessment earned the student, that will replace the former grade of the pre-assessment. Students can also choose to retake an assessment with a different version of the same assessment. And if they perform better, if they show that they have indeed deepen their knowledge and they're able to perform better on that assessment, that new score, because they're showing growth, will replace the old score. And in this way, students aren't punished for taking smaller steps in the journey of learning. Learning is a process, and students, I believe, shouldn't be punished for taking steps along that journey. It should be acknowledged that it is a process, and we should focus more on growth than how many steps it took the student to reach the final goal of mastery. And I believe that this method of final assessment allows that to be the main focus of the assessment. And of course there would still be grades for in-class work and participation and very valuable things such as that, but in this way the student's summative assessment would reflect only how much final growth they had achieved, not the rate that it took them to achieve that growth. So that is how I CAN goals work. This method helps me be sure that I have thoroughly covered and thoroughly assessed each of the standards with each of my students, and it helps them see their own learning. Thank you.